Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, the Research Director for Ipsos Social Research, Laura Demasi. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Agriculture, Barnaby Joyce. The award-winning satirist behind Veep and The Thick of It, Armando Iannucci, who's appearing in Melbourne and Sydney this week for the Sydney Writers' Festival and the Wheeler Centre. Vice-Chancellor and CEO of the Australian National University, Nobel laureate Brian Schmidt, and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition and Shadow Minister for Education, Tanya Plibersek. Please welcome our panel. Thank you very much. Now, Q&A is live on ABC TV in Eastern Australia. It's live everywhere else on the ABC News channel at 9:35 Eastern Standard Time. And you can watch and listen live on iView, YouTube, Facebook, ABC News Radio and Periscope, of course. Our first question comes from Alex McIntyre.
Armando Iannucci, many satirists, including yourself and the creators of South Park, have expressed the opinion that in the post-fact Trump world, humour and ridicule are no longer weapons of political change. At what point do cynicism and satire lose their ability to subvert and instead become tools of hysteria and distraction, which strengthen rather than undermine the status quo?
Armando.
Right. Just arrived and...
Yes, welcome to Australia. We brought in a Scotsman to ask a
Yes, no, so I see. Thank you very much. The axis of evil there between us. Look, yes, I think comedians and satirists are having a problem with Trump at the moment because normally satire is something where you take something that is true and then you bend it and twist it and you exaggerate it until it becomes absurd. But that's what Donald Trump does in every sentence that he speaks. So he's a sort of self-basting satirist, really. He is his own joke. And therefore, it becomes difficult for satirists and comedians, and call them what you like, to do that. I think the answer really is for them to look at the thing that Trump throws at them, this idea of post-truth and fake news. The satirists, the comedians that seem to be making some effect in getting behind his argument are those that act like journalists, like John Oliver on HBO and The Daily Show on Comedy Central, where they actually have a team of researchers doing the job that newspapers and news programmes do, and actually analysing the things Trump says. There's a guy on YouTube called Peter Serafinovich who just revoices Donald Trump, and he does a thing called Sassy Trump, which is just to take Donald Trump's words and revoice them, doesn't change them, so they're still Trump, but he does them in this terribly sassy way, which just takes away all the alpha male kind of butch quality that Trump is trying to give them. And strangely enough, it then makes you listen to what Trump is saying. So I think the biggest answer to comedy against Trump is Trump's own words.
So you're not saying that his first 100 days have been effectively beyond satire, you just have to be clever about it.
That goes back to what I was just saying. I mean, Donald Trump said that these 100 days are a stupid measurement of how any politician should perform, and it's unimportant. But he said this at a rally held to mark his first 100 days. So he's doing it himself.
Yep, Barnaby, is he beyond satire, do you think, Donald Trump?
I'd like to say repeat the question, but I think that'd be the rest of the show. Donald Trump, you've got to remember, he is elected by the American people. And, of course, you've got to be a little bit circumspect about jumping in there and saying, oh, we're going to ridicule this person because the American people have a democracy. They went to an election under their college system. I acknowledge that he didn't get the majority of votes, but under the college system, which is how they work, and we have something...
Are you saying you can't laugh at anyone who's actually got a majority of the votes?
I think that in the...
Not that he did, actually.
No, but I think in a way you've got to be careful because you're laughing at the people who voted for him, and that would be an insult. So you've got to remember, don't start laughing at the people of Tennessee. Don't start laughing at the people in the Appalachian Mountains. Don't start laughing at the people who don't have jobs and and looking for something desperately to change that format so that they can get the dignity back into their lives, because that's why Mr. Trump is there.
Well, I'll just go back to Armando. Do you take that point, that sort of laughing at him is a reflection on the people who voted him, like the whole basket of deplorables thing?
No, I mean, that was a silly thing for Hillary Clinton to say. I mean, I take the point that I think we have every obligation and necessity to analyse Donald Trump, whether it's seriously or comedically, because what he says and does has an impact not just in America, but all around the world. Has an impact on all of us, whether it's his beliefs or lack of beliefs in climate science or his approach to North Korea or even his methods of making it more and more difficult for us to get into America. That has an impact on everyone. He's on an international stage. And I've just finished doing a film about Stalin, and one interesting piece of information I picked up was at the height of the terror in Stalinist Russia, people circulated joke books, jokes about Stalin, which if they said or if they were caught in possession of them, they would be shot. And yet they still felt the need to make humour against that system. There's something intrinsically human about us in that we need to be able to laugh at something that either frightens us or confuses us.
I should make the point that you've also talked about the limits of satire, and you've quoted Peter Cook, the line about those wonderful Berlin cabarets, which did so much to stop the rise of Hitler.
Absolutely, yes. No, comedy, don't get me wrong, comedy can't change anything. It won't change an election. I think you're on a hiding to nothing if you think just by making jokes about Donald Trump you're going to turn the election round. I think that way madness lies. But I think comedy helps. It's another way of analysing an argument.
You'll do more than that. You'll infuriate the people even more. If there's reactions brought in Donald Trump, then mocking those people is not going to change their views. In fact, it's going to embolden their views that they feel like outsiders in the system.
But I think you're equating making a joke about Donald Trump with making a joke about the people who voted for Donald Trump.
The people who voted for Donald Trump didn't do it as a joke. They voted for him because they wanted change.
Let's hear from Laura briefly on this. I mean, your job is to measure the public mood. So
I was just about to say, I was thinking the whole time you were talking, actually, I think what you were saying, Barnaby, makes a lot of sense, because from what we've seen, a lot of what Trump is supposedly kind of stands for really resonates in Australia. So I think Australians are really good at separating the man from the ideology or the things that he proposes to stand for. And yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, often we'll hear people say, you know, that guy's nuts, he's mad, but gee, he's direct. You know, he's straight. He just says it like it is. And a lot of the things he talks about, like I have those problems too. So a lot of the things that he stands for really resonates with Australians. So again, you know, I think if it's kind of made it all the way here to the sort of, you know, colonial outpost down here, I think that demonstrates the power of some of those platforms.
I just want to hear from our other panellists. And Brian, obviously you've come from the United States. And what's your reflection?
Well, I think Donald Trump has lived up to what he said he would be during the election. There's no doubt about that. That sort of counter-establishment, counter-normal evidence is kind of disturbing for those of us who are used to that being a very serious part of what policy is. He clearly has resonated with a portion of the population, and
a big one.
Pardon?
Big. In Australia, talking about Australia, really like 60, 70%. Some of the key kind of tenets of his brand of populism, it's a majority of support of some of those key things. Things like our political leaders need to take back the country from the rich and powerful. Those kinds of sentiments are really popular in Australia.
So he is resonating with a portion of the population. We can debate what fraction. And I think for people like me who run a university, we need to understand exactly why that is and what we need to do to resonate with the broader Australian and world population as well, if we're going to help them out.
Tanya, just go back to the original question. Is he beyond satire?
I don't think anyone's beyond satire, and I think it's absolutely critical in a democracy to be able to poke fun at your leaders. It's one of the things that is great about a democracy. And I don't think, Barnaby, if people are making fun of me or of you, that that they're disrespecting the people who voted Labor or National. They're making fun of me or of you. I think it is. It's a measure of the health of a democracy that the leader can be made fun of. And just on I agree with you though, that it is important to listen to the people who voted for Donald Trump and what they're saying about the reasons they voted for him. I think that's a really true point to make.
The sort of people who used to vote Labor.
And, well, I think, well...
I think I'm going to say next.
I mean, you know, like, are we really going to have that conversation now?
Yes.
OK, well, let's, right?
Yeah, okay,
Over the last 75 years, inequality in this country has grown worse. The only time it actually improved was during the Rudd-Gillard years. The Gini coefficient in Australia improved because we increased the pension, particularly for single older people, because we invested in health and education. Right now, we've got the lowest wages growth on history, and yet company profits increased by 65% last year. So if you want to talk about the people who are voting for Donald Trump, it is for this reason that although our country is wealthy, inequality in this country is growing, and people feel locked out of the prosperity that they are helping to generate.
And what's happened also is you've seen, and I see this all the time, and this is a group that Trump talks to, and it is a group the Labor Party left behind. The Labor Party have left...
Barnaby.
I listened to you, be polite.
Well, can I just make the point, Barnaby, because I did interrupt Tanya, so I'm going to take an equal opportunity interruption here, if you don't mind. 10% of people are now saying they're going to vote for One Nation. They're people who are leaving, many of them leaving your ranks of voters.
So you've got the Labor Party have forgotten about labourers, and you can see that in areas such as coal mining, where they've said they're politically incorrect. They've moved away from blue-collar workers. They've moved into a more of sort of an urbane contest in the inner suburbs, and that's how it's seen, and that's how you're getting a drift of people off to minor parties. It is happening. All the time we even see in issues such as power prices, people are saying, you're talking about the food stock of my manufacturing job and you are not supporting me. You are not coming into bat for me. You're not coming into bat for me as a miner. You're not coming into bat for me as a manufacturing worker. Every time that you find an excuse or a reason to run to the inner suburbs, that's exactly where you go.
That is not what's happening. Your government closed down the car industry in this country. Your government is pushing down wages, including trying to get rid of weekend penalty rates for some of the poorest workers in this country, hospitality, retail and so on.
And you're
arguing in the Industrial Relations Commission to push down wages.
You're saying you don't believe in coal mining anymore. You got the Hunter Valley.
We'll come to Barnaby and Tanya. We'll come to some of these issues, including coal mining, later. We've actually got another question on the issue of satire. I think it's a good one to go to right now. Rodi Fazani.
In Islam, it is generally considered extremely disrespectful to show images of their Prophet Muhammad or Allah. With present increasing tensions, many satirists, comedians and the general media are essentially afraid of talking about anything related to Islam, let alone criticizing or satirizing Islam in fear of retaliation or vengeance attacks. When it comes to other religions such as Christianity, however, it is openly mocked, satirized and criticized in many forms of the media. Is Australia's freedom of speech at risk as a result?
Armando, I'll start with you. You don't have to talk about Australia's freedom of speech, but the general point. Is it a fact that satirists such as yourself would tend to steer away from subjects like this?
I think it was. I think that's not so much the case now. I think it's also to do with the fact that if you've grown up in a historically Christian country, you know much more about the religion. You know, you're much more familiar with it. I think there's always a danger that if you're attempting to write about a faith that is not yours and that you don't know too well, that you get it wrong. So I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I think the best comedy is the well-researched comedy. I'm certainly not in favour of there being no-go areas in terms of what comedy can do. I think because somebody makes a joke about something, it's not to belittle it. It's just another way of examining it. It's a way of holding it up to the light. I think there is a tendency for a lot of people very quickly to say that they're offended. I actually do think there's nothing wrong with being offended. If you have strong views, they should be able to withstand jokes or attacks or counter-arguments. You should be able to... it's a way of finding how strong your faith is by seeing how it can cope with people who disagree with you. And going back to really what was being discussed at the tail end of that first question, I felt caught in between the clash of the deputy titans in the middle of it. But really, I think it's all about... we only now talk to our own. You know, on Facebook and on social media, we talk to people, we befriend and we like and we follow people who agree with us. And rather than engaging with people who disagree with us, we unfollow them, we block them, we non-platform them.
Is that a particular problem for young people, by the way? Because there is this echo chamber.
There is this echo chamber. There is this, and it's very easy to be bullied online. If you say something, if you, incident this week of someone who tweets something, and before you know it, they're treated as if they burned down a children's hospital or something.
If you take tweets seriously, you would commit suicide.
Exactly.
It's just,
Yeah.
I mean, I just say, I think I've got like 70,000 followers on Twitter or 80,000 followers, and I reckon
68,000.
69,999 hate my guts. but you know, you can't take it seriously. Facebook, you got friends, and Twitter, you got crazy people.
Barnaby. Well, I'm sure that'll get a Twitter response. Barnaby, Deputy Titan, if we can call you that tonight. Just go back to the question.
You can, if you
Just go back. Well,
what's your superpower?
I was going to add something about
He's
race,
very good at
Tony.
burning coal.
Yeah. All right.
I was going to add something about, I know it's an interesting trend I've observed over the last kind of 5 or so years that I've been doing this specific kind of work, that in our research groups, when anybody mentions race in any way, there's always a disclaimer first, always. It's like, I'm not being racist, but at the local school, there's a lot of Chinese kids. My son's in a school and there's 29 Chinese children and one, and my son. So I think that there's people find it really difficult to just to kind of work through these a period of transition and these tensions, and they feel like they can't talk about it, and they're so afraid of being perceived as racist. So they feel the need to kind of issue that disclaimer first to protect themselves, and yet they just want to talk about the changes that they're observing in their neighbourhood and in their community, and I think that's kind of part of that. It's like they're no-go zone, not just in comedy, but just in general conversation.
I just want to go back to our questioner, Roni. Do you feel like you're getting an answer to your question?
Yes, it's just one question I have is, do you feel as if kind of the feeling of worrying about being racist or coming across as like Islamophobic, do you think that might play a part in kind of avoiding these kind of topics and discussing these and talking about these kind of problems?
Yep, Tanya Plibersek.
I think there's a difference between self-censorship and being thoughtful about other people's feelings. And so I think if things actually do need airing and discussion, whether that's done seriously or through comedy, that's a good and healthy thing. If you're being deliberately offensive or insulting just for the hell of it, just because you can, I really question the need for that in our public discourse. But it's very hard, I agree, to write rules about that or to have a fixed approach. What you hope is that people use their best judgment and goodwill to the people around them and participate fully in public conversation without, going out of their way just to be hurtful.
Ryan.
Yeah, so this is a reoccurring issue. There's a real hypersensitivity out there about certain issues, and it makes it very difficult to discuss. But I think if you're going to actually work through some of the issues, you do need to be able to have frank discussions. But people are scared because, as you say, when you say something on Twitter, suddenly you have 5,000 negative things come back at you. Or the moral equivalent in media, we've seen that a number of times over this year, where you cannot have a provocative view without being attacked full on. And it needs to be done in good faith. But I do think we've gotten to a point where we're not able to have the frank conversations we need to work through some complicated issues.
I think there's a side. I was trying to pick your suit coat, but it looks like you go to De La Salle. Is that correct? Okay, I've got good eyes. Now, the issue there is it's also part of the Christian ethos too. Remember, it's turn the other cheek. If someone does something, you turn the other cheek. If they don't agree with you, shake the dust from your sandals and walk on. I mean, it's part of the culture that maybe you and I have that you should cherish. You just got to deal with it. If things get thrown at you, you got to deal with it and not retaliate.
But do you accept there's a difference between satirising aspects of religion or laughing at something and outright blasphemy?
Yeah, I think
which is what the cartoonists in Denmark and the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists were accused of.
This Christie, that's the one that I found completely offensive against my faith, Christian faith. I just thought, you've gone too far. That is not art. That is a complete insult to my religion. And I think that there has to be a calibration in anything you do. Like nothing is in absolutes, but there is a right to question a right to invoke humour, but there is not a right to just go completely over the top, knowing full well that it's seen as a complete and utter insult to the audience that follows that faith.
After the Charlie Hebdo incident, it was still possible to go online and look at the cartoons, which I did, and they were dreadful. I mean, they weren't very funny. They were poor comedy. Now, normally the response to that is for me to just be able to go on air and say I didn't like them. What happened in that incident was that people turned up at the offices and shot them, and that is the problem that I think is making it difficult for people to have a proper, healthy conversation about these issues, is that threat of violence that is still there.
Let's go to another aspect of free speech and how controversial it can be. Even in Australia, we've got a question from Grace Iannucci.
Yeah. Actually, I want to just respond to Yassmin Abdel-Magied's comment.
Yassmin Abdel-Magied.
Yes, Majid. I'm sorry about that. Comment on Anzac Day. My word to her is to be careful not to take advantage of democratic free speech and insult what this nation stands for. Those being remembered on that day were the people, I believe, that fought and helped establish the fabric of this nation. So my question is this: should we all realize where the limits are in the area of freedom of speech?
Okay, the limits of free speech. We've seen, Tanya Plibersek, we've seen a lot of criticism of Yassmin Abdel-Magied for her comments on Anzac Day. What do you say?
I think, thank you for the question. Anzac Day is a very special day in the Australian calendar. It's the most sombre of our commemorations because we are thinking of people who sacrificed a lot, who've given their lives, the consequences for those who are left behind. And so I've never thought it was an appropriate day to make political comment. So I was very critical of Stuart Robert last year when he linked Anzac Day with soldiers' negative gearing. Like, I just thought that was beyond the pale in bad taste. And I think equally these comments from Yassmin this year were inappropriate. But she's apologised.
Let's just remind people of what she actually said. As Facebook post, it said, "Lest we forget," then in brackets, it simply had 4 words: Manus, Nauru, Syria, Palestine. Did you find that offensive?
No, I was just going to say she has apologised, so now I think it's time to move on. I think it's a sombre day. It's not a day for making broad political comment, but she has apologised, and I think that should be an end to it.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably ill-judged based on how we treat that day, but I don't think it was treason. I think she apologized very promptly. I think we should move on. You have to be able to make a mistake. We need to have tolerance. We need to get rid of the hypersensitivity, allow people to make mistakes, move on, so that we can have the conversations we need to have.
So the questioner asks, are there limits to free speech? I think that's right.
There's another question here. It says, should we all exercise caution and respect in this area?
Should we all exercise caution and respect in this area? I think was the question.
Again, I think that it is within the bound of what we're talked about, that if people want to even do satire of the day, I think that's okay for us to better understand ourselves, although I would say you have to do it at your peril because it is such an important day for us. But in this case, I think...
There was a famous play back in the 1960s called One Day of the Year, which was entirely a satire of Anzac Day and incredibly critical of it. In those days, it seemed you could be more critical of Anzac Day. Something has happened in the meantime where it seems to have become more sacred.
Everything, as I said, is been put in very black and white terms now. And as I truly think we need to relax a little bit, understand that probably poor judgment in this case, the way it was done. But as again, I'm happy.
Let's go to Laura again. What do you think the Australian public generally thinks about this? Do you think people actually care, or is it just a small group of people?
I think that I agree that it was in poor taste, but she apologised, and I think that the average Australian would be scratching their heads right now at the severity of the response. That really, she doesn't need to lose her job. She said, sorry, let's move on. I think most people would agree that it was in poor taste and that it was wrong, definitely, but I don't know if the reaction is warranted. I think most Australians are fairly reasonable and they would be scratching their heads right now and just...
Barnaby, Joyce.
Look, every country has one day they take very seriously, and for us it's Anzac Day. I met a couple of young adults who were part of Legacy. I don't think they were thinking of Manus or Nauru. I think they were thinking of their dad, who was dead, and they don't want another, a form of sort of political stepping stone to other issues that can be dealt with on the other 364 days. This day is, and those people who walk through the dark in the morning to go to the dawn service, they know exactly why they're there. They're there for the people, their families, or they've known, or for their nation in general, who have either died for it, been maimed for it, lost opportunities because of it, lost their mind because of it, but did it for our country. And that's where it should stop. And I think that for the ABC, to be quite frank, and I don't know all the details, but Natasha Exelby lost a job because she missed an order queue, and so.
Well, she didn't actually.
Well,
she was off air briefly. I believe she's back now, so she didn't lose a job. You're not suggesting that Yassmin should lose her job.
I just think that people's in some instances outrage because of this.
Can I just put your outrage was pretty clear because you actually questioned whether how difficult it would be for you to defend the ABC's.
I'll tell you why.
Hang on, just finish this point. You actually questioned whether it would be difficult for you to defend the ABC's funding as a result of what this one presenter said.
Because
in a few words on Facebook.
The ABC just sort of buried themselves under a rock under it. You didn't come out and say, well, this is our views on it. You just let Yassmin sort of deal with it herself in the media. You were nowhere to be seen. The ABC management was nowhere to be seen. We were waiting for them to come out and give their opinion on it. We didn't see them.
Isn't it for her to deal with it herself?
It's the reason she's there is not because she owns a television station. The reason she's there is because this is the public-funded broadcaster.
Mm-hmm. Now, Barnaby, you actually went further. You said you had a sense of the culture of the ABC is at odds with the culture of Australia. Well, that's a pretty. I mean, that's a pretty stringent statement.
Why didn't you come out and make a statement immediately afterwards?
The ABC did make a statement.
Immediately afterwards?
Immediately afterwards, and actually said in the statement she'd withdrawn the post and apologised for it.
I just think that...
And made the case that it was inappropriate. So I think there was a statement from the ABC.
I do believe that it was way beyond the pale of what was expected. And I can tell you right now, Tony, up and down the street, people were furious about it. They were absolutely furious about it.
Now, Armando, you'd be familiar with incidents like this blowing up with the BBC, and of course the whole question of the BBC's culture is often raised under those circumstances as well. What's your reflection on this as a visitor?
Well, first of all, yes, very familiar. I mean, I understand absolutely the solemnity of Anzac Day, but my understanding is that she tweeted this thing, as you said earlier, mustn't take tweets seriously. She tweeted this thing.
It was on Facebook,
and put it on Facebook, but very quickly apologised and took it down. So clearly she understood that that was inappropriate. All of us, I think each one of us at the end of the show will go home thinking, oh, I could have answered that question a bit better. I mean, there's no way we get everything perfect verbally first go. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that, we have to have a little bit of give and take in this. Are we saying otherwise that she should have been banned from putting that up? Should we be going on to Facebook saying, why did you let that go up on Facebook for more than half an hour? You should have taken it down. Or should we not be focusing much more seriously on the stuff that does go up on Facebook and Google and YouTube that's far more appalling and which they're only just beginning to get to grips with taking down much quicker? That's the bigger problem.
And the kinds of things that were said to her in response. I was just watching a bit of Media Watch before, and I deliberately keep away from the Twitter sphere. I've got no interest. And I was seeing these things for the first time, and I was blown away.
It can
I mean,
be quite
I
traumatic.
can't repeat them. That was just...
Yeah,
Who
but
would-
two wrongs don't make a right either.
No.
Crazy response.
No, but we're not calling for Donald Trump to resign because of what he tweeted about the Mexicans. You know.
All right, we might leave that point there. That pithy remark. Remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A tonight, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanta. Keep an eye on our Twitter account and the Conversation website for fact checks by the experts. The next question comes from Lucy Schroeder.
It's been suggested that the government's recent announcement regarding university funding could raise the cost of degrees by up to 25%. Now, irrespective of how good or bad this debt may be for an individual, will this model really improve and lead to a more educated nation? Or will it simply push higher education out of the reach for everyday Australians?
Start with Brian Schmidt, since you do run a university. What's your view of this?
Well, if you look at Australian students, we have a great education system. You know, we have 6 universities in the top world 100. That puts us 3rd behind the US and the UK. We generate $22.4 billion last year of export income, which is more than the actual money spent by the federal government. So I think you could argue that we're doing pretty good here by world standards. And I should say that export income is unique by world standards. That is something we're able to do here in Australia. So when you look at how much students are paying for their education in this country, they're actually paying more than most of the OECD. So they're already paying a fair bit. And yes, what has been proposed to pay more is probably affordable, but I think the question is it fair and just?
Let's just quickly go through it. Student fees will rise by 1.8% next year and continue to rise by a total of 7.5% over the next 3 or 4 years to 2021. Is that going to turn poorer students away from tertiary education? That's the gravamen of that question.
So the beautiful thing of the income contingent loan system that we have here is that the actual deterrence to individual students will probably be relatively small, but it will be there because they have loans they have to pay off earlier. It is hard to afford a house, and so it will have some detriment. There's also the question of it being fair. You know, ultimately, providing an education is a monopoly good. The government does it, no one else really does it, and so, yeah, you can ratchet the price up, and they can't really do anything other than go along with it, because that's the nature of it.
Now, I have to ask you this, from your point of view as a Vice-Chancellor, is this a consequence of the failure to get fee deregulation? Because universities wanted to be able to put up the cost of degrees as much as they wanted to, effectively. They're not going to be allowed to do that, and now fees are going up by government decree.
Well, I think it's difficult to say that one happened directly because of the other, because it's a political decision in both cases. You have to make a decision as a government of where you put your limited funds. And students obviously would like the amount that they pay to be as minimized, but I think it would be unfair to categorize it that this is a direct consequence to deregulation not happening. I think it is another political decision that has been made.
Tanya Plibersek.
Well, I'm pleased that we have fought off complete deregulation, fee deregulation, and the 20% cut that was proposed in the 2014 budget to university operating grants. I am still very worried about this most recent package. It looks like $3 billion of cuts over the next 4 years to universities, after the government's already cut about $4 billion from universities. Brian mentioned that Australians already pay quite a big share of their university education costs by international standards. We've got the 6th highest student contribution in the OECD, so it's not like Australian students aren't already paying quite high fees. And we want a system where as many young people as possible get a post-secondary school education through university or TAFE, because we know that the jobs that Australia will generate in coming decades, the high skill, high productivity, high wages jobs that we want to see for our young people will require post-secondary schooling in many, many cases. And investing in universities is one of the ways that we can ensure a prosperous future for this nation. It is an individual benefit for someone to have a university degree, but it's a benefit to our nation as well to have a highly educated workforce that prepares us for this changing world. So we think it's very important that we continue to have a system where you get to university based on your talent, your preparedness to work hard and study hard, and not what your parents can afford to pay.
Now, the Labor Party had been warning of $100,000 degrees. One thing that's come out of this is a 4-year degree will now have a maximum price, and that is $50,000. That's half of what you were saying. Isn't that some kind of victory?
Hang on, we actually need to look more closely at the numbers, because we've heard estimates as high as 75,000, and I'm pleased that they haven't yet been able to fully deregulate universities, because students, academics, universities have run a great campaign supported by Labor that has fought this off. Doesn't mean they don't want to do it, it means they couldn't get it through the Senate.
Barnaby, Joyce.
Right. Well, first of all, you have to go through the chronology of this. Remember that HEC started under a bloke called Bob Hawke in 1988, when Tanya would have been at university. What we've had to do here is with everything we do is we try to straighten out the budget to get us off the trajectory of debt that the Labor Party put us on. This is about a $2.6 billion saving. Now, remember, the Labor Party, before they left under Rudd and Gillard, proposed a $6 billion saving in this area, a $6 billion saving. So we're at 2.8, they were at $6 billion saving. We are trying to make sure that we provide this good. 54% still picked up by the taxpayer. Remember the bricklayers, and remember the other people out there, the shearers, they don't go to university, but they have to pay the tab for people who do. And we understand that it's a good and needs to be supported. What happens when their children want to go to university and find they can't afford to? No, that's not correct, because nobody pays up front. You can get the loan. You can get the loan, and that's how you deal with it. And therefore, you would start paying your loan back when you get to $42,000. In New Zealand, it's $19,000, and then you start paying it back. And even then, I think it's about $8 a week or something when you're at if you're on $42,000 a year. We acknowledge that this is actually a loan, and loans do actually have to be paid back. Currently, we have $52 billion that is owed to the Australian people via student loans, and we think about 25% of it never gets paid back. So we've got to try and make these ends meet. We do, and these are difficult decisions. We wish we never had to go down this path, but we had to, because when we got back into government, we were hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in debt, and this is all part of the process of trying to turn it around. Okay. Now, you acknowledge that you were looking for a $6 billion saving when you left. Why was that?
Well, let me answer. We actually increased university funding from $8 billion a year to $14 billion a year. We went to the last election with a proposal to spend... No, we didn't, Barnaby. We went to the last election with a proposal to spend an extra $14 billion over the decade, and you went to the election with a proposal to cut $12 billion.
Weren't you proposing the $6 billion of savings for Gonski?
No, $12 billion. The last election...
No.
What year are you living in, Barnaby? Honestly, you went to the last election.
When Gillard and Rudd...
You went to the last election with $12 billion of cuts. We went with an investment of $14 billion. Now, you talk about paying off the debt. You have added $100 billion to net debt.
You have
Gillard and Rudd. The deficit.
When you looked for $6 billion of savings when Gillard...
Okay, Barnaby, you realise what's happening here is the audience...
Why don't you answer the question?
Barnaby, the audience are being deluged with figures. It's very difficult to actually make head or tail of what either of you are arguing about.
Okay,
so
well,
we might say...
I can help. There's other things. With the $75,000, that is for people doing medicine. Now, medicine, people who become doctors go on to make quite a reasonable return, and good luck to them. It's a very good return, but I think $75,000 to pay back the taxpayer who paid for them to become a doctor is not outrageous.
All right, we're going to move on. We've got a few other subjects to deal with. We've got a video question for Brian Schmidt from ANU student Bella Himmelreich.
In your position as Vice-Chancellor of the Australian National University, you've publicly stated that you want the university to be a leader in climate action. Now more than ever, climate solutions rest upon taking away the social licence of big fossil fuel companies causing climate change. As a student at ANU, I want to know why then ANU still invests millions in coal, oil and gas.
Now, Brian, you've got to love free speech.
Oh, yes. Very active group of students and faculty at ANU. So I think the question really comes down to how you act. effectively on climate change. We need to get rid of greenhouse gas emissions between now and 2050. There is a transition. The lights in this studio, like it or not, are powered by coal and a little bit of natural gas, a little bit of wind. And the same is for the lights at my university. So what our university has done is said, we are going to have an investment policy where we preferentially spend money on low emission areas. We have a screen so that if you primarily produce coal, because we think that's probably doesn't have a great future and we have a long-term investment, we're not going to invest in that. And so that is, I think, a very responsible...
But is the questioner right that ANU is still investing millions in coal, oil and gas? That was what she said. So
the total amount I can't give you off the top of my head. It is a very, very small fraction of our total portfolio of $1.4 billion because it's a weighted thing. We use those things. I do not want to be a hypocrite and say, sorry, can't invest, but don't get rid of them because the lights are going to go out.
Right, so it's not a matter of principle, it's a matter of investing in good profit-making returns.
It's not just profit, it's going through and saying there's a transition needs to occur, and if you want to go through and say we are going to divest completely of these things, but we still need to use them, I have a problem with that. That is what I'm saying we're not doing. We're pushing our investment towards renewables. We bought part of a wind farm this year. So we're taking that approach rather than going through and doing something which I think is hypocritical.
I'll bring in Barnaby Joyce here because, as you know, well, the Westpac Bank has made a decision with its climate change policy not to invest in the Carmichael coal mine. It has a general view that coal is going out of fashion.
Well, I think they're absolutely wrong. I think this is the reality is that we need baseload power, and we get baseload power overwhelmingly in this state from coal. If we decide that we don't want to use Adani's, the coal from the Galilee coal fields, to help poor people in India be able to turn on their lights like we do, they're still going to get coal. They're just going to get coal that's 60% less efficient from India. And so you're actually going to increase your carbon emissions. And I just think that in this process, if you go for, we're going to get 100% renewables, where the Labor Party's off to, I don't know where that is at the moment, whether it's 40% renewables or 50%. We're seeing what happens in South Australia. What happens is that a form of chaos comes in onto the grid. We are not able to keep power on in a reliable, long-term fashion, and we have huge spikes. And of course, what happens is people start losing jobs.
Okay, Barnaby, can I get you to stick to the question? 19 banks around the world said no to Adani. If you can't find the finance, if they can't find the finance, will the government put that money in to make sure the Carmichael mine goes ahead?
We've said we're prepared to support with the rail link, and we look forward to...
What about direct finance from the government to Adani?
Well, I'm not going to start answering that question, but I suspect not. But the issue is the infrastructure that surrounds it. We're happy to look at that, and we are doing that. And I'm going to be a complete economic pragmatist. If we have to make sure this economy works, we have to earn export dollars. One of our largest exports is coal. And I don't think there is some sort of... We have to realise that we also have a moral responsibility to other people and other nations to keep their lights on. They have their right to exist in the 21st century like we do, and we can't sort of lord it over people and saying, oh, well, we prescribe a way of life for you that you can't afford. And I think Warren Mundine, who was the president of the Labor Party, wrote an excellent article on this, saying what you're going to do, even in Australia, is create two classes of people. Those who can afford the power and those who can't.
Okay,
and that's not
Barnaby, I'm going to interrupt you because we've got another video question for you, and we'll bring in the other panellists after you respond to this. From Tony Walker, who we must confess is a former ABC producer. He's now retired in Fish Creek, Victoria.
You're on the record denying the science around climate change. The science clearly says that those blocking climate change action could end up with the deaths of many people, perhaps even millions, on their hands. I wonder if you ever worry about being wrong, and whether, after some catastrophic climate-related event, you ever worry about the prospect of facing a climate crimes tribunal. What would be your defence?
Barnaby.
That's obviously a question from Twitter. Look, first of all, it's not that I don't think that the effects of carbon dioxide affect the climate. Of course they do, right? What I don't like
you're not a skeptic anymore.
What I don't like, no, hear me out. What I don't like is every time there's a cyclone, there's a thunderstorm, there's something else, people go, oh well, bingo, that was caused by you turning on your lights. Well, no, it's not. It's caused by a whole range of events that have been going on forever, of which part of that effect, no doubt, is greenhouse gases. Okay, I acknowledge that. But this is used as
human-induced climate. Because I'm just trying to get to the point of whether you've changed your view.
You want me to look? Of course,
is it human-induced?
Of course, if human activity is putting greenhouse gases, and it does, in the atmosphere, of course that has an effect on climate. But I'm not going to jump in there and say, therefore, what they always take the next step and say that cyclone was climate change, that bushfire was climate change, everything, and of course it's not. It's part of the natural path of what happens in the climate all the time, for which part of the effect are greenhouse gases. But you can't, where the Greens go, and so the more extreme sides of this debate is they try to pin every climatic catastrophe on climate change, and then they try to link that to some sort of guilt trip that you're not allowed to turn on your lights anymore.
But it's
Armando,
not just
I want to hear from Armando just for a minute. Just hold your horses, everybody.
No, but there is therefore a case to be made that, you know, we're justified in being worried and angry at what Donald Trump is doing at the moment, which is to absolutely dismantle any of the climate agreements that, you know, America, one of the biggest gas producers and fossil fuel users in the world, is doing, because he's set it. There's something about America which always held itself up as being pioneering. You know, it was the first to do this. It was first at the motor car, the mission to the moon. And it was actually on the verge of pioneering something extraordinary, which was renewable energy actually being cheaper and more popular than fossil fuel. It was just on the brink of it. Britain last week had its very first 24-hour days using non-fossil fuel produced energy. So that is the future.
Fair bit of that was nuclear power, of course, which they won't allow us
another debate to be had there.
I don't want that debate. I don't want that debate.
No. But I think we're reaching that. I think we're looking at something that there's clear progress, and we're switching it off. And I think that's a terrible state to find ourselves in.
But look, if you want zero emissions, it's right. If you want zero emissions, nuclear power will give you zero emissions. I mean, but then all of a sudden people say, oh no, can't have that either. And you'd say, well, how do we do this? You know, you'd say, oh, well, we're just going to use wind power and photovoltaic. OK, they'll be part of the mix. But if you want to make that 100%, you will not be able to afford your power bill, because it will have times where it will be absolutely for free and other times where it will be absolutely through the roof. And we're seeing that now. And who does dear power affect the most?
Okay,
all people.
Barnaby,
they're the ones
I was going to throw over here, because it does actually sound like you've shifted your position a little bit to where you now
it's always the form of moral precedent. They say, do you believe in climate change? And you say, well, there is certainly an effect of greenhouse gases. And they say, therefore, you must believe in my solution. And that's
well, actually, can I just point out that you used to refer to the CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology's warmest institutions, trying to get your money and put it in their pockets and send their reports backwards and forwards to one another.
I don't know whether we use the word warmest, but I do believe that people use it. I do believe that people get on a bandwagon for their own benefit and for a pecuniary benefit to themselves.
Can I just hear from a scientist, because we're lucky enough to have one on the panel. Even got a Nobel Prize. Now, are you at least mollified by the fact that that Barnaby Joyce now appears to agree that climate change is a real and human-induced phenomenon?
I am very happy to hear that. I've never met Barnaby before, so I haven't heard anything.
Tony's not so happy.
Barnaby, you shouldn't say things like that.
So it's, you know, climate change is real. It is something we need to think about. It is something we have to take steps over the next 30 years to deal with. You are correct that often any little thing is ascribed to climate change, but as climate change becomes bigger and bigger, more and more things really are going to relate to that. And people have, I think, this false belief that it's only going to be 2 degrees. It's only 2 degrees if we actually really start changing quickly. It could be 5, 6, 7, we don't know, it's hard to calculate when it becomes really big. So we have what would be potentially a very big change looming ahead if we do not act.
And can you calculate the consequences of 4 or 5 degree increase in global temperatures?
So I would say almost certainly not, because the most likely thing that will happen will be some breakdown of society, potentially war, certainly famine, and you can't put a price on that. It will have major consequences of which I don't want to consider.
OK, we've got another question on this, and clearly the debate is not over for some people. This is a question from David Strutt.
Thank you for that. I was interested in listening to that because my question actually revolves around alternative facts. And I know people sneer and mock when Trump would talk about alternative facts, but here's my thought on it. About 10 years ago, we were told that we would be in a prolonged drought, the dams would never fill again, so we went out and bought a desalination plant for $1.8 billion. We're paying $500,000 a day to keep it running. It's never been used. It's never been needed. Should there not have been an alternative fact that told Tim Flannery that there's another way of looking at this? Things aren't the way your model says it will be. Isn't there another model that has other stuff that guides it? Some models are garbage in, garbage out. I'm just wondering, if you have an alternative fact, then you could have a balanced argument.
So you're making the case that Tim Flannery, former Australian of the Year...
Oh, I meant to say that, yes.
...climate scientist...
Yes.
No, it's not.
Was wrong. Yeah, I'm saying that, yeah.
All right, it's not a climate scientist.
He's not a climate scientist.
Right.
That's good.
You'd write a book called The Weather Makers.
Yeah, he wrote a book.
He's not a climate scientist.
I just want to go back a little bit to what Barnaby said, that every time there's a cyclone or a extreme weather event, bushfire, someone says it's this event was caused by climate change. I actually don't think people say that at all. I think
they do. I think they do it in the Parliament.
No, they don't, Barnaby. What they say is if climate change gets to a dangerous level, we will have more events like this, and they will be more extreme.
They do say it, and and you can hear it from the Greens, from Sarah Hanson-Young and others every time one of those events happens.
I don't think you can use Sarah Hanson-Young as an example of what ordinary people are saying. So. I don't think you can interpret that as a widespread belief.
I would say that ordinary people are saying that. I've heard it lots of times. I've heard lots of people saying, wow, the weather in Cairns is not like it used to be 5 years ago. It is nothing like it used to be, and, it's got to be climate change.
Yeah,
but that may well be valid in that case.
That's different to saying this bushfire is the fault of people turning the lights on, which is Barnaby's claim. Now, to what you were saying, I think that any scientific debate is contestable and should be contested, but you're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. So we have a contestable scientific debate based on identifiable, measurable, observable phenomenon, not people's opinions, not just any stuff they make up.
So do you believe in... I mean, I think what the issue is here, that Tim Flannery came out and said that would have the drying of South East Australia and the dam...
He was the most passionate arguer for that.
And it was wrong.
And he was wrong.
It was wrong.
And one thing we know about Australia is that we've got rain at the moment, and one day again there'll be drought. Because our weather is like a cyclical.
But saying it's not going to rain again is something entirely different.
Can I just make the point? That's fair enough. But you just heard our scientists on the panel here say that if the temperatures rise to the levels that the worst levels of 4 to 5 degrees on top of what they are now, you could see widespread breakdown of human society. I mean, do you think that's alarming?
But I don't believe that someone had... See, this is exactly what I was saying before, and it was brought up by this gentleman, is that the issue that, do you believe in climate change? Then you must accept my statement, Tim Flannery's statement, that it's not going to rain again and the water reservoirs are going to dry out. So we then go into the process of spending billions of dollars on desalination plants, and what do you know, it actually does rain again. In fact, we get floods again and everything like that. And this is, if you don't accept the premise of my argument, you are there for, and you might accept the premise of my argument. If you do accept the premise of my argument, you have to accept all my solutions as prescribed by me. And in the case of Tim Flannery, I think he's a paleontologist. He's not a climate scientist.
OK, we're running out of time. Oh, you can make one last point if you like.
I just wanted to say that in the end, to your question, things are a balance of probabilities, and you have to jump based on the probabilities. The desal plants, we can even argue about whether or not the probabilities were correctly stated, but places jumped, and in the end, it wasn't necessary. And I'm afraid that's the best we can do, is science tells you when you can jump with the highest probability of certainty, but it never tells you absolutely the right thing to do.
That's because it's modelling, right? And it's what you put into the model that tells you what's going to happen at the result of the model. So if you put in different stuff...
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. No, we'll take that as a comment. Tanya Plibersek.
But to be fair, Goulburn almost ran out of water. They were talking about trucking water into Goulburn. Sydney's had very low dams at times right around Australia. And Barnaby knows this. He's representing farmers. They suffer drought for years and years at a time. And then the weather changes and it's great while you got the rain. But sure as it's rained for a while, it'll be dry again.
OK, let's move on. It's time for one last question. This one comes from Scott Chalmers.
Given the coming budget with its apparent lack of expenditure available for important areas such as education and health, and the projected increase in government debt, which will be a burden on the future, given that the ABC only attends to a viewpoint of about 50% of the population of the voters and taxpayers, should the $1 billion of funding given to the ABC each year be diverted to other government department expenditures that are in shortfall, and the ABC be funded by a tax-free donation or by supporters who don't want advertising on media?
Barnaby Joyce.
I was wondering if I was going to get that one.
Look, you did sort of forecast it by complaining
of
about the ABC's culture.
No, well, and that's fair enough, because there are a lot of people, to be quite frank, out there who believe that the ABC goes too far to the left, and you might, and I know you'll fervently disagree, and they ask us all the time, you know, why does my taxpayers' dollars have to go to an organisation who I don't think properly has a balance in their political views? They always say, where's the right-wing commentators in the ABC? We know all the left-wing commentators. Where are the right-wing commentators? And you know, this is a discussion that when we do go to Expenditure Review Committee and we do try to support you, these are at times hard questions to answer. I mean, you know, we can see something on Late Night Live. I like listening to Philip Edwards myself, but by gosh, he's way to the left, and they'll go through a whole range of commentators and say all these prescribe to the left-leaning side of politics. So why are all the taxpayers having to fund something that only half of them believe in?
And you're having this argument on the ABC. I'll just make that point. Armando, it could be time to reprise the McTaggart lecture, because you talked a lot about the BBC being under threat.
Yes, the new Conservative administration 2 years ago, which has only lasted 2 years because we're now having another election, the BBC was coming out with charter renewal. I mean, it's in a different place because we're not funded directly by the taxpayer. The BBC is funded by the licence payer. So if you have a television, you have to pay a licence for the telly, and you get BBC and all its services free as a result of that, which slightly takes it one remove from government. I think that may be where part of the problem comes, because once you're funded by the government, as the questioner says, you then become part of the whole conversation about funding of every department, and then it's possible to take a little bit from broadcasting and put it where it needs more. So maybe one way of protecting the values of the ABC is by looking at a charter and a licence fee. I mean, the BBC is also very, very left-wing. It's also very, very right-wing. It gets abuse from politicians on the left and the right in equal measure, which indicates it's doing something right. And it has presenters who have had a political background. There are presenters I know who used to be young Conservatives or who were very socialist, ran young Labour movements when they were students. And if you want your politics presented by people who are passionate about it, it's inevitable you're going to get people working there who've had a background. But the question is, are they impartial? Do they do their job impartially?
Tony, who's the commentator on the ABC that you would say is definitely of the right wing?
Amanda Vanstone.
She is not.
Amanda Vanstone, Tom Switzer, they both have great programs.
Tom Switzer, I'll give you. Tom Switzer, I'll give you. He's on radio, but
what are you saying, Amanda Vanstone?
Tom Switzer. So we've got two. No,
it's your former immigration.
Well, I think Tom Switzer, I agree with. Amanda, not so much. But that's pretty good. They thought of two, and they're both on radio.
Well, you only thought of one.
I was going to say...
But all the rest, and you're actually in the ABC.
But Philip Adams, who you mentioned, he's also on radio, isn't he?
Well, so he's on radio, yes.
Tony Jones is on TV.
So the government already cut. The government's already cut $250 million from the ABC. They did that in their first budget, despite the promise before the election not to cut from the ABC. And then Malcolm Turnbull, when he became Prime Minister, cut another $50 million from the ABC budget. So they've already cut $300 million. And the very simple way that you could afford the ABC and health and education investment is not to give a $50 billion big business tax giveaway that will mostly benefit foreign shareholders and very large companies.
Right.
And then you can afford health and you can afford education and you can afford the ABC and you can afford a whole lot of other great stuff that you want to do. Like
that's a whole other debate, Tanya. And now let's hear what the public, in your view, thinks about the ABC.
Wings aside, let's move away from the left wing and the right wing, because there's a lot of content on the ABC that people engage with, which is not news and current affairs. So there's plenty of that. So we in our research, we hear a lot of discussion about the ABC and mostly it's very positive. People feel a great sense of relief that it's still there, particularly in the last 5 or 10 years where the media landscape has been completely transformed, where free-to-air television or commercial free-to-air television has become the home of reality TV. So we hear so much complaint about that and so ABC has become, or the ABC has become more important, not less now, because it's discussed as one of the only places left to, to get good quality news, good quality programming. That's not a competition between two people fighting for a man or a woman, or it's, one of the few places left in the media landscape to engage with that kind of content.
Armando, just a final point, because we're nearly out of time, but the value
Well,
of
I was going to
public
say,
broadcasting. I know you've spoken passionately
Try and
about
hold on to it, because if you can have, given we know how slanted every newspaper is, we know how other networks, if they rely on commercials, are under pressure to change the quality of their programmes. Hang on to what you've got. If you've got something that's protected from that, it provides a very valuable and is not under pressure to push up the ratings, is not under pressure to take on the most expensive sponsorship, and is allowed to take risks and to draw controversy, then that's a precious thing. And it only happens to strength in a few countries, and Australia is one of them.
That's where we'll have to leave it tonight. Thank you very much. And please thank our panel. Laura Demasi, Barnaby Joyce, Armando Iannucci, Brian Schmidt and Tanya Plibersek. Thank you. Now, remember, you can continue the discussion on Q&A Extra with Tracy Holmes and the Checkout's Ben Jenkins. They're taking talkback and comments on ABC News Radio and Facebook Live as soon as we finish here. Now, next Monday, Q&A will be in Melbourne on the eve of the budget with Australia's leading tax lawyer and corporate strategist Mark Liebler, who's also a member of the Referendum Council looking at Indigenous constitutional reform, the Chief Executive of the Urban Development Institute, Danny Addison, the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Material, Dan Tehan, and Tasmanian Labor Senator Lisa Singh. Until next week, good night.
Still got something to say? Join the discussion on Q&A Extra now on ABC News Radio and Facebook Live. From shy teenager to the people's princess, how Diana became an icon.
For her, fashion was a nuclear weapon.
She loved the fun of saying, oh, the press are going to love this.
To mark 20 years since her passing, Diana, Designing a Princess, premieres tomorrow on ABC and iView.
She was propelled onto the world stage in spectacular fashion.
But someone's got the wrong girl.
Now, Megan Gale reflects on her overnight success.
It just really, really damaged me a bit.
And becoming a mother.
How was that?
Painful.
Anne's Brush with Fame, Wednesday at 8 on ABC and iView.
Our homes, jobs and security, our families and the choices we make, our communities and services. Budget 2017 will affect all of us. With special coverage from ABC News Online, know what it will mean for you and your finances. Know the story with ABC News. Thursday.
This deal is going to make the both of you very, very wealthy.
When the abduction threatens their master plan.
I've put way too much into this deal to see it fall through.
Mitch will do anything to save it.
I think we can help each other out.
7 types of ambiguity.
There's not one person here that is telling the truth.
Continues Thursday on ABC and iView.
Hello, Jason Om with the top stories on ABC News. Students will face higher university fees from next year as part of an overhaul of the higher education sector. Universities will also 4 years. Police are investigating